I'd like to welcome you to this tutorial on molding plastic items. This is a handy skill to have if you need replacement parts or need to do something a little creative. So I'd like to walk you through my process. First of all, I want to show you the supplies that I'm going to be using. I always have a shoebox on hand because that's where we'll do most of the bigger molding. The supplies I personally like to use are this Alumilite Amazing Mold Maker, which comes in a 2-part casting kit. I choose to use alien tape as a way of sealing my mold as I'm getting the first step done. Outside of the box, it comes as a roll, and that's kind of a handy thing to have. You'll notice I have some Legos. There's one of 2 ways that you can set up a base for your mold, and I like to use those. I always have a couple of different sizes of disposable plastic cups, a glue stick, some popsicle sticks for stirring, synthetic nitrile gloves or latex gloves, whatever you like to use to keep yourself protected from the chemicals, and a pair of scissors, as well as whatever it is that I'm going to be molding. I also definitely suggest that you have a cover on whatever surface you're doing, because if a spill happens, you want to be able to clean it up without causing a bigger mess. So today what I'm going to do is show you my process in molding a replacement pair of these little boots. So to start the process, what we need to do is, in concept, we need to think about pouring a silicone mold, and that's step 1. Pouring a silicone mold to make a cavity to pour the rosin in afterwards. So step 1 is what we're going to focus on right now. And the 2 ways that you can go about doing this. You could start, if your item is small enough, you can use a disposable cup, which I would cut down to size. And inside the cup, you want to firmly secure the bottom of whatever item you're trying to make a duplicate of. I use a glue stick. It won't damage the item, but a glue stick a little bit. You can press this right down. It may take a couple of minutes to secure, but it'll ultimately secure to the bottom, and when we flip this mold in the end, the bottom becomes the top. Now this works well if you've got really teensy tiny items, but more often than not, I find it's a handy thing to be able to have a little bit more space to work, and if you are molding something a little bit larger, a shoebox is definitely a good solution, and I'm going to choose to use it for casting the silicone mold that I'm going to make for these boots. So in this case, I'm going to glue my item right onto the shoebox. And I'm going to work within here. And I'm going to try and conserve my materials by doing 2 boots out of 1 mold. So I'm going to put those side by side, little space, press them down so they're reasonably secure in there, and give that a couple of minutes to dry. Now, the concept behind doing this is that we're going to mix the 2 parts of the rubber or the silicone that's going to create the mold. And then the next step will be to fill the mold with a rosin substance to create the item. But for what we're doing, you need to have a reservoir to collect the silicone that you're working with, or the rubber. I'm really not sure what the substance actually is. I just call it silicone. So that's where, if you were doing a small item, you could contain it right inside this cup. But if you were doing something a little bit bigger, that's where the Lego fun comes in. And I like this because it really gives you the flexibility in size to be able to create something that is exactly the size you need without going over. What I'm going to do inside the shoebox here is create a little rectangle box around my item. And I'm going to build it up a couple of levels. And in doing so, That's going to give me a very nice tight cavern around the shoes so that I'm not wasting materials. Sometimes if you're doing something in a cup, you'll find that for a really little item, you're going to have to fill this to the brim, and that's going to take a lot of your mold making materials. Whereas if you can create the encasement around your item to fit, you're going to be able to save on those materials, and that can sometimes be a pretty good investment. So you want to be conservative in using what you've got there. Also, playing with Legos is fun. So I try and size things so that I am as tight as possible without wasting a lot of space. So sometimes it takes me a few times to kind of get exactly the size encasement that I want. Sometimes there are little bits of rubber that stick to this in between projects. Maybe it is rubber. Whatever it is, the materials for molding are nice to work with, and there are options as far as what you go with. I started using a material that I bought from a company called Polytech. I always called it the blue goo, and they were very good to me, but I started being able to find this in my local craft store, so I gravitated to that just for the convenience of being able to buy it when I needed it on demand. I've found that when I do this, what I was saying is, I find it's better to have a shape that I can do one clean edge around rather than like spiraling. So I tend to gravitate towards making things a rectangular shape. At this stage of the game, you can see that I'm building my structure around my boots. The boots are taller than the structure, and I need the structure to rise above the boots, because ultimately we're going to be pouring a liquid into this, and we need it to level off on the top. So I need to keep building. Now I've got my base pretty much started, but I need to keep building upwards until I have a very comfortable amount of height above the item that I'm molding. But you'll see how this is shaping up. At this point, I'm really just doing the busy work of building it up. All right, and that right there looks pretty good to me. It is significantly taller. This is taller than the boots. So right now the boots are nice and secure because they're glued in here, and the structure is loose. So I need to do something about that, and that's where the alien tape comes into play. So this is really amazing stuff. I like it because we are going to be pouring a liquid. And if I poured liquid into this right now, it would start seeping through all the cracks, and it wouldn't stay put for very long. And this needs to stay put because it has to set overnight. So the alien tape gives me some flexibility, and I've just learned from experience that I can eyeball about how much I need. This stretches, and it has a piece of backing tape on it, so I'm going to peel that off. And this definitely will stick to itself. It is, ooh, this will stick to anything. So while you're working with it, it's pretty malleable, but you don't want to let it dry in any position. Now what I'm going to do on the inside is make a seal around the edge. So I'm going to make sure the alien tape adheres to the bottom of my shoebox about halfway through that piece, and that the other half is along the wall of my structure. I'm going to try and keep it from closing in on itself in the process. And I'm just going to go all the way around the base of my Lego structure, trying to make this essentially a waterproof seal. I don't know if it's actually waterproof, but it is liquid proof enough for these particular purposes. And you know what, it's not actually a bad idea to go around the top part as well if you want to make sure that nothing seeps through the cracks of the Legos, because those are definitely not liquid or waterproof. It has a nice, good, tight seal. Gonna have to re-glue those boots down. That's okay. The more important part of the project here is making sure that the liquid isn't going to come seeping through the bottom. So at this point, I'll just take the little bit of extra that I have and I will stretch it some to go further around the top part of the Legos. And there we go. The structure itself is fairly well encased in the alien tape. Now, all this shaking things around has dislodged the boots. So this will be my real bonding. Give that just a moment to make sure that it's bonded. Just jiggle it a little bit to make sure those boots aren't going anywhere. And if you feel pretty comfortable doing this and nothing falls out, you're probably right on track. So that's how I'm going to make the reservoir for creating the mold. Again, just the first part of the project. And now I'm going to go on to this Alumilite Amazing Mold Maker. So it's a two-part kit, the red and the white. The reason that I like to have a couple of different sizes of cups are that we're going to be just filling this little part here. So I'm not going to need a whole lot of the material. So I can pour into the little cups, but this is half and half. Eventually they're going to have to go together into a bigger container, and that's where my larger cup will come into play. This part I just kind of eyeball. I would say this is where you want to put on your gloves and keep your area as clean as possible. Keep your hands clean. Any kind of gloves that you use for crafting are fine. It's just to avoid the mess. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to eyeball this. I'm just going to pour some of the red, and based on the size of my reservoir there, I think that's probably good. If I'm mistaken and I've done too little, I can mix a little bit more later. If I've got too much, maybe I'll quickly do another project. And I want to make sure that these are in even amounts. Eyeballing to make sure that they are level. They look pretty much even to me. But if I poured one into the other, obviously I would have overflow. So I'm going to instead pour both of these into a larger cup. I'm going to use my popsicle sticks here to scrape out the material because it's not exorbitant, but it's a little bit pricey, so you don't want to be wasteful. I'm going to scrape out as much as I possibly can there. And the most important part of this process is that you want to make sure everything is thoroughly blended in the end. So I'm starting with my red, I'm mixing in my white, and then I will stir to make sure I have one even color all the way through. At this point, it starts to look like a creamsicle. It's not. But you just want to stir it until the color becomes consistent. And with this particular material, it pretty much turns the whole thing to a solid red. So as long as you don't see white streaks anywhere throughout, and when it starts to kind of look like this, you've got it right. Okay, at this point, we're about ready to create the mold. I'm going to advise you to pour this slowly. Now, there's already a few air bubbles and they will work themselves out, but you don't want to exacerbate that problem. You don't want air bubbles if you can avoid it. And I think the best way to do that is to pour slowly. So at this point, I'm getting ready to do my pour, and I will pour directly into the caverns of the boots and around, and I'm going to fill this entire thing right up to the top. And if you're thinking that, oh no, she's ruining the boots, I assure you, I've never had a problem with this material releasing itself afterwards. However, I do know that there are some mold release products out there, and if you choose, you might use one of those first. And again, we have to cover the entire item that we're molding. We have to have a perfectly smooth surface at the top. This needs to set for about 24 hours. And once it's set, we're going to dismold it, and the top will become the bottom, and the bottom, where the boots are glued down, will become the openings that we're going to pour the rosin into. So step one is you have to have the mold to begin with. That's what we've created. I'm going to let this be for 24 hours, and then we're going to come back and see what we've got. So we're about to start the second part of the casting process. We're going to demold the silicone mold that we made 24 hours ago and see how that came out. And then we're going to be working with these supplies. Now, once again, I'm going to have my synthetic nitrile gloves or latex gloves, whatever crafting you want to use. I'm going to have an X-Acto knife for this process, a couple of popsicle sticks, some smaller little plastic cups, and the big supply that you'll need for casting will be something to cast with. I personally really like this product. It is by Amazing Casting. It's Amazing Casting Rosin. It is a 2-part substance that will mix together in the little cups. There's also a clear cast available, and there are other product lines that you can use, but that's the one that is my personal favorite. So we're going to start by looking back and demolding what we worked on 24 hours ago. Now I'm going to have my X-Acto knife ready for this. I'm going to try and get it separated from the cardboard box. Now this alien tape gets very sticky, and so that's where, to start with, the X-Acto knife can help to just kind of dislodge the tape part from the Lego piece that we made. And once you get it started to pry up, it becomes a little bit easier to work with. In this case, I may even just tear some of the box apart in the process. That's why a cardboard shoebox is kind of nice, because it doesn't matter what you do to it. There. And once I get it started, then it becomes a whole lot easier to extract what's inside. And here, I'm going to start taking the Legos apart and seeing what is inside, because it's the red mold that we're interested in. So the rest can be disposed of. All right, so we're getting to the part we're most interested in, which is the actual mold. Once we've removed it from the first part of the process, kind of looks like this. If I'm going to reuse a mold, I just like to clean up the edges a little bit, so I use my X-Acto knife just to cut off that trim that I don't need, because that way it's a little nicer for storage. So these are the bottoms of the boots right here. And that has now become the top of our mold. So what was set up like this, I have reversed. And now I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to just trim around the toe part of the boot. Remove any excess so that I can see that top part. And it does not have to be absolutely perfect here, as long as the part on the inside matches. Okay, next I'm going to move over to where the heel is. I'm going to just separate a little bit so I can see that heel on each one. Now, depending on what it is that you're making the mold of, you might be able to pull the item out just like that where it is. But in this case, with the boots, they're kind of an unusual shape, and I know that there is a gap between the toe and the heel. So what I'm going to do is take the X-Acto knife and just run it down that gap to separate it. Now, it doesn't matter that the mold will go right back together. In fact, that's what's supposed to happen. But I do need a little gap there to be able to remove the boot. Now, this can be a little bit of a tricky process. You might have to work with it a bit, but from here, you can see that nothing is sticking to that boot. It's just a matter of it's lodged in, and there is the red silicone all on the inside of the boot, which is exactly what you want to make the shape. But it will take a little bit of work to just coax that out of there. You can see it's coming along. Here we go. All right, and here's the part where I can really see what we've done with the inside of that boot mold. And you can see the original perfectly fine. The silicone process did nothing to harm that, so just remove the other one. Just working a little as we go. Beautiful. Now I have a nice mold to make a matching pair of boots. The next part of the process is the casting, and I am going to recommend that you wear safety goggles for this. I'm also going to recommend that you wear old clothes, because this can be a little bit of a messy process. I always think, again, it's good to have a covered area when you're working, and the silicone gloves keep this from getting on you. And this process is very similar to the first step, in that we're going to mix a two-part system. Okay, and to start this next step, I'm going to use the Amazing Casting Rosin. This is the opaque version. The opaque version works much quicker than the clear cast. Clear cast takes about 24 hours to set. Opaque version takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And I'm just going to pour into these cups equal amounts of part A and part B. And this will become kind of an eyeball it learning process to gauge about how much you think you need. And the first one, I always try to go a little bit generously just to make sure I have enough. So, even parts, part A, part B. I usually put the slightly more fluid side in first. Don't know if that really makes a difference, but you want to stir this up and make sure that they're very nicely mixed together. So you can give it maybe 20 seconds of good stirring, or until you see that it's really gotten clear and you're confident that they're all very well mixed. Okay, now this is why you want safety goggles, because this part can splash back on you if you're not careful. You want to open up the mold enough that you can see where you're pouring this in, and you want to pour right in and fill all the caverns. I like to lift up the toe part. Oops, see, that's a great example of backsplash right there. I like to lift up that toe part just to make sure that it's gotten all the way into the mold. And the part that overflows does not concern me all that much, but it is why we're protecting our surface for sure. Scrape off a little excess if you want. Just make sure that it's level with the surface. And we're going to let that set for about 10 to 15 minutes and then come back and see what we have. All right, so 15 minutes later, let's see what we've got. Now, this is the excess. That's normal. Again, that's why we're going to protect our surface. What we've got here has a little bit of excess, and that's okay. We're going to split open where the seam is. And just like with the original, I'm just going to work that boot out. Sometimes the first one, especially with a new mold, takes a little bit more to get it out. Just maneuver that out a little bit, a tiny bit malleable, and voila, we have a boot. Now it has some rough edges, and that's to be expected. So we'll go back to the X-Acto knife. This is a little easier to do straight out of the mold. We'll just clean up those edges. And once you've kind of cleaned off the excess of the mold most of the way, you can take some sandpaper, and sandpaper will do the final cleaning up. Now, this one is just simply white opaque mold. When they are straight out of the mold, they're a little bit malleable on all ends. Now, if I wanted this to be a different color, there's a couple of ways that I could approach it. One is that I can add some rosin dye right into the rosin mix as I'm doing it. If I'm using clear cast, I can add other materials right into it, like sometimes you might want to use glitter. That is not going to show up very well in the opaque version. A little bit, but not quite to the full glitter effect you might want, so maybe a clear cast is better for that. One other option that I sometimes do is spray paint. So you could just kind of treat that as you would anything. Probably want to do a coat of a base of some sort, but you can paint this material, and that's one other way that you can customize your boots. So we got our second one just about out. That one is a little bit cleaner to start, so a little less cleanup work on it. Be careful with the X-Acto knife. And again, I would take some sandpaper just to trim off the rough edges, but you can see we have got a very nice pair of boots straight from the mold. So you can see that's the basic process of making a mold and casting with it.